The late afternoon sun hung low over the city, casting a golden hue across the crowded streets. Traffic was sluggish, the kind of slow crawl that tested every driver's patience. Marcus Johnson didn't mind it, though. His air-conditioned sedan glided along smoothly, insulated from the chaos outside. The soft hum of jazz played from the radio, and his mind wandered briefly to the meeting he had just left. It had gone well, better than expected, in fact. Hours of preparation had paid off. He had presented his case on officer misconduct investigations to the commissioner and several city officials, and the reforms he'd been pushing for years were finally gaining traction. He was proud, but careful not to let it show too much. Pride could be a dangerous thing in his line of work. As the Assistant Director of Internal Affairs, Marcus carried both authority and burden. His job wasn't about popularity, it was about accountability. That meant he had made enemies within the department, some of them powerful, others petty. Still, he wore the responsibility with quiet dignity, knowing it was necessary. As he cruised down Jefferson Boulevard, his phone buzzed softly in the cup holder. A message from his daughter. Dinner at 7? Don't be late this time. Dad's smiling face with smiling eyes. He smiled, typing a quick voice reply through the car's Bluetooth. Wouldn't miss it for the world, baby girl. Then, out of nowhere, flashing red and blue lights filled his rearview mirror. Marcus frowned slightly, checking his speedometer. He wasn't speeding. His turn signal had been used at every lane change. His registration was up to date. His car, a black, late-model sedan, clean and well-maintained, was in perfect condition. He hadn't committed any traffic violation. Still, the patrol car behind him made its intentions clear with a short whoop of a siren. Marcus let out a slow breath and steered toward the shoulder, easing his car to a stop. Through the rearview mirror, he caught a glimpse of the officer stepping out. Young, mid-30s perhaps, with a buzz cut and a posture that radiated arrogance. His hand rested casually but deliberately on his utility belt as he approached. Marcus had seen this type before, too many times, in fact. The officer didn't approach with the cautious professionalism Marcus expected from trained law enforcement. Instead, he strode up with the swagger of someone who believed control was his birthright. His eyes narrowed as he took in Marcus through the window, scanning him from head to toe like he was cataloging a suspect. Marcus lowered the window halfway, keeping his hands visible on the steering wheel. Years of experience and personal history taught him that visible hands meant safety. License and registration. The officer demanded, his tone clipped sharp. No greeting. No explanation for the stop. No acknowledgement of courtesy. Marcus handed over the documents without a word, his movements slow and deliberate. The officer snatched them, glanced briefly, then smirked. Marcus Johnson, nice car you've got here. Mind telling me what you're doing driving through this part of town? The question wasn't casual. It dripped with accusation. Marcus met his gaze evenly. I'm driving home from work, officer. Is there a reason you pulled me over? The officer ignored the question, his lips twisting into a mocking half-smile. Work, huh? And what kind of work lets you wear a suit like that and roll in a car like this? Must be a good gig. Marcus felt the familiar tightening in his chest, not fear, but frustration. He knew exactly where this was heading. He had seen it before in other officers' reports, in citizen complaints, in bodycam footage. The assumptions, the arrogance, the casual cruelty hidden under a badge. But this wasn't about to be another nameless report. This was personal. I work for the police department, Marcus replied calmly. The officer chuckled, shaking his head like he had just heard the world's worst joke. Sure you do. What are you, janitorial staff? Security in the lobby? Maybe a driver for one of the brass? Marcus didn't respond. Silence, he had learned, was often the most powerful reply. The officer's smirk faltered slightly, as though he was irritated his provocation hadn't landed. I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle, the officer barked suddenly. Marcus sighed inwardly but complied, opening the door slowly and rising to his full height. At 6'2", broad-shouldered, And with the calm composure of someone who had weathered storms far worse than this, Marcus wasn't an easy man to intimidate. But he also knew appearances could escalate situations dangerously fast. As he stepped out, he noticed movement across the street. A woman paused on her porch, watching curiously. A man on a bicycle slowed, phone raised discreetly to record. The scene was drawing attention, as it always did in these encounters. The officer circled him, eyes scanning Marcus's tailored suit, his polished shoes, the car behind him. None of it mattered to him. In his eyes, Marcus didn't belong. "You carrying anything illegal?" the officer asked, voice low but filled with suspicion. His hand hovered near his holster. "No," Marcus replied simply. "Any weapons?" "None." The officer's smirk returned. "Funny, you don't look like you belong in this neighborhood. We've had complaints about suspicious vehicles around here. Figured you might be one of them." Marcus clenched his jaw, but said nothing. Every word he spoke would be dissected, twisted, potentially used against him. For now, silence was his shield. The officer moved toward the car, peering through the windows like a predator circling prey. He tapped the roof, once muttering, "Mind if I take a look inside?" Marcus spoke evenly. "Yes, I mind. You don't have probable cause." That answer seemed to irritate him further. "Step back," the officer ordered, pulling open the rear door without waiting for consent. Marcus's eyes narrowed, but he didn't move. His heartbeat was steady, though adrenaline hummed under the surface. He had seen officers like this destroy lives with a single bad decision. He knew the importance of letting the moment play out, but he also knew this officer had just crossed a line. The briefcase on the back seat was unlatched, files stacked neatly inside from the meeting earlier. The officer rifled through carelessly until his hand stopped on a black leather wallet tucked between folders. He pulled it out, flipping it open. His smug expression froze. Inside, gleaming under the afternoon sun, was Marcus's badge, the badge of the Assistant Director of Internal Affairs. The silence that followed the discovery of Marcus's badge was thick and suffocating. For a brief second, the officer's confident smirk faltered. His eyes flicked from the badge to Marcus and then back again, as if trying to reconcile what he was seeing with the assumptions he had already made. But pride is a dangerous thing. Pride, mixed with prejudice, is even worse. Instead of acknowledging his mistake, Officer Daniels, Marcus caught the name stitched into the uniform shirt, tightened his grip on the badge. His jaw clenched, and his eyes narrowed into something colder. "What's this supposed to be?" Daniels asked, voice sharp. Marcus stayed calm. He had been in too many confrontations like this to let emotions cloud his judgment. "That's my badge," he said evenly. "Assistant Director of Internal Affairs. I work at headquarters. You just rifled through confidential case files without consent." Daniel scoffed. "Nice fake. You think you can just flash some toy badge and scare me off?" Marcus tilted his head slightly, his gaze steady. "If it's fake, you can confirm that in less than a minute with dispatch." But Daniels didn't reach for his radio. Instead, he tucked the badge under his arm like contraband and stepped closer, his posture radiating intimidation. "I don't like your tone. I don't care what you say you are. Out here, I'm the one in charge. You get that?" Marcus met his glare without blinking. "I understand exactly what's happening here, officer. You stopped me without cause. You escalated without justification. And now you're digging yourself into a deeper hole." The words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. Daniel's nostrils flared. Around them, the world kept moving, but slower now, as if gravity itself had thickened. The woman on the porch across the street was no longer pretending to water her plants. She was watching openly. The cyclist had stopped entirely, phone aimed squarely at the encounter. A delivery driver in a brown van had pulled over a block away, leaning out his window, his face intent. Every second, more eyes were on Daniels, and Daniels felt it. "Turn around," Daniels snapped, his voice rising. Hands on the hood of the car. Marcus's brows lifted slightly, but his expression remained composed. "On what grounds?" "Because I said so," Daniels barked, voice cracking slightly under the weight of his own fury. He stepped closer, hand brushing the butt of his holstered weapon. Marcus took a slow breath. This was the moment, the razor's edge he had seen so many times in his career reviewing officer conduct, the moment when control gave way to ego, when training collapsed under prejudice, and when a single decision could alter the lives of everyone involved. But Marcus wasn't some powerless man on the street. He wasn't going to be bullied into silence. "If you're going to search me," Marcus said, his voice firm, "you'd better have your body camera rolling. You do have it on, don't you, Officer Daniels?" Daniels froze for a heartbeat, then sneered. "Battery's dead. Forgot to charge it." Marcus arched a brow. Convenient. He let the word linger, sharp as a knife. Daniels's face reddened. He grabbed Marcus's arm roughly, forcing him toward the hood. "You think you're smarter than me, huh? You think that badge makes you untouchable?" Marcus placed his hands on the hood calmly, the metal warm under his palms. His heartbeat was steady, his breathing controlled. He knew the script too well. Comply, endure, survive. But this time was different. This time, the imbalance of power was an illusion. Daniels just didn't realize it yet. As Daniels patted him down, his search aggressive and unnecessary, Marcus let his eyes wander to the crowd forming nearby. He saw the phones recording. He saw the frowns of concern, the whispers of indignation. He knew this wasn't just his word against the officers anymore. When Daniels finished, finding nothing, his frustration deepened. "What's in the trunk?" "Work materials," Marcus replied flatly. "Pop it." "No," Daniels stepped back, disbelief etched across his face. "Excuse me." "No," Marcus repeated. "You don't have a warrant. You don't have probable cause. You've already violated protocol by searching my vehicle without consent. And now you're demanding more? This stops here." Daniels's hand twitched near his radio, but he hesitated. Calling for backup meant scrutiny. Scrutiny meant paperwork. Paperwork meant supervisors asking questions. And if the badge in his hand was real, Marcus could see the storm brewing behind the man's eyes. Daniels was trapped between his own arrogance and the possibility that he had just crossed the wrong person. "You think you're clever," Daniel spat, "but you don't fool me. Guys like you, suits, nice cars, you think you're above the law, but I know what you really are." Marcus's gaze didn't waver. "And what's that, officer?" Daniels's lips curled into a sneer. "A criminal, just waiting to get caught." The words were ugly, meant to sting. But Marcus had built armor over the years. He'd been underestimated, disrespected, and dismissed before. The only difference now was that Daniels had picked the wrong target. A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Someone whispered loudly, "He's an IA director. That's internal affairs." Marcus didn't turn to see who said it, but the effect was immediate. Daniels stiffened, his eyes darting toward the small but growing crowd. The tension snapped like a taut wire. Daniels's bravado faltered just long enough for doubt to creep in. Marcus stood straighter, adjusting his suit jacket, his voice low but commanding. "You're done here, Officer Daniels. Every second of this is being recorded by them, by your dash cam, and by me. If you continue, you'll not only lose your badge, you'll face charges." Daniels opened his mouth, but no words came out. His hand twitched at his side, useless, powerless. And for the first time since the lights flashed in Marcus's mirror, control shifted. It wasn't Daniels who held the power anymore. It was Marcus. The air was thick with tension. Officer Daniels stood frozen, badge in one hand, the other hovering near his holster as if the mere proximity of the weapon might reassert his authority. Across from him, Marcus stood tall, unshaken, his calm demeanor only making Daniels look smaller in comparison. But pride is a stubborn master. Daniels wasn't ready to back down. "Don't think you can intimidate me with your fancy title," Daniels growled, holding the badge up like it was evidence in a crime. "I don't buy it. You could have bought this online for $50. I've seen guys like you before, slick talkers who think they can worm their way out of trouble." Marcus's lips twitched in the faintest trace of a smile. It wasn't amusement, it was the recognition of a pattern. This wasn't new. He had reviewed dozens of complaints against officers who responded exactly like this. Dig in deeper rather than admit fault. Call it in, Marcus said simply. Daniels ignored him. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded packet of papers, waving them dramatically. You want to talk about authority? I've got a warrant right here. Marcus's brow furrowed. A warrant? That's right. Daniels snapped, unfolding the papers quickly and thrusting them toward Marcus's face. Signed by a judge. Gives me every right to search this vehicle and take you in. Marcus took the papers, scanning them carefully. Years of reviewing documentation for internal affairs had sharpened his eye to the smallest irregularities. He could spot inconsistencies instantly, wrong letterhead, improper signatures, outdated forms. And this wasn't just sloppy. It was laughable. Officer Daniels, Marcus said slowly, this isn't a warrant. The hell it isn't, Daniels shot back, his voice rising. Marcus held the paper up for the crowd to see. This is a traffic citation template, blank. You didn't even fill it out properly. There's no judge's signature, no case number, no probable cause listed. You printed this from your cruiser computer and tried to pass it off as a warrant. A gasp rippled through the onlookers. Phones tilted forward, zooming in on the paper in Marcus's hand. Daniels's face flushed crimson. You don't know what you're talking about, Daniels barked, snatching the papers back. He crumpled them in his fist, as if destroying the evidence might erase the mistake. But the damage was done. The crowd had seen. Marcus crossed his arms, his patience thinning. This is exactly why internal affairs exists. Officers like you think the badge makes you untouchable. But it doesn't. It holds you to a higher standard. And right now, you're failing it. Daniels's chest heaved. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not publicly. The murmurs of the growing crowd gnawed at him, each whisper another chip in the armor of authority he wore like a second skin. He jabbed a finger at Marcus. You think you're so righteous? You think you can stand there and lecture me in front of all these people? Marcus didn't flinch. No, I think I can stand here and remind you of your oath. You swore to serve and protect, but all I've seen you do today is harass and fabricate. The officer's hands shook. He wasn't just angry now, he was afraid. Fear of exposure, fear of losing control, fear of the consequences if Marcus was truly who he claimed to be. Desperation makes men reckless. Daniels yanked out his radio, pressing it to his mouth. Dispatch, this is Officer 12 to 47, requesting immediate backup at Maple and 3rd. Suspect resisting, possible armed. Marcus's hand shot up, voice sharp. Cancel that call. The command in his tone startled even Daniels. For the first time, Marcus let his authority show, not just as a man wrongfully stopped, but as the Assistant Director of Internal Affairs. His words carried the weight of someone who was used to being obeyed. Daniels hesitated, radio hovering near his lips. You make that call, Marcus warned, and you'll answer for filing a false report. Backup will arrive, and the first thing they'll see is a crowd of witnesses with video evidence that contradicts your story. Do you really want your career to end that way? The crowd murmured louder, emboldened. A woman's voice rang out. He's right. We've got it all on camera. Daniels's radio hand faltered. His jaw tightened, and his knuckles whitened around the device. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he lowered it. For a moment, silence reigned. The only sounds were the soft buzz of cicadas and the distant hum of traffic. Marcus took a step closer, lowering his voice so only Daniels could hear. I know your type. You think the badge gives you power over people. But the badge isn't a weapon, it's a responsibility. And when you misuse it, people like me are the ones who hold you accountable. Daniels swallowed hard. His bravado was crumbling, but he wasn't ready to give in. Not yet. You think you're untouchable, Daniels muttered. But everyone slips up, eventually. Everyone. Marcus's eyes narrowed. Maybe, but today isn't my slip. It's yours. The words hit their mark. Daniel stepped back, fists clenched, breathing ragged. He was cornered and he knew it. But instead of retreating gracefully, he lashed out. You think internal affairs scares me? Daniels sneered, his voice shaking. You don't know this city. Cops like me, we're the ones who keep order. We're the ones who make sure people like you don't get too comfortable. The words were venom, dripping with bias barely disguised as authority. And Marcus had heard enough. He straightened his jacket, turned to the crowd, and spoke loudly enough for all to hear. Ladies and gentlemen, you've witnessed an officer fabricate authority, attempt to present false documents, and abuse his position. Please keep recording. The truth matters. Phones lifted higher. Daniels's eyes darted wildly, panic seeping into every crack of his composure. For the first time, he realized the fight wasn't just between him and Marcus. It was between him and the truth was winning. The quiet hum of tension was broken by the distant wail of another siren. Marcus's eyes flicked toward the sound. So much for Daniels backing down. The officer had managed to slip a partial call through before Marcus cut him off. Backup was coming. Daniels's face twisted into a grin that was equal parts relief and defiance. Looks like you're not as clever as you thought. My guys will be here any minute, and when they arrive, they're going to see you for what you really are, a problem. Marcus didn't flinch. He adjusted his jacket, his movements deliberate, calm. And they'll see you for what you are, Officer Daniels, a liar who tried to fake his way into authority he doesn't have. The crowd shifted with anticipation, whispering among themselves, phones raised higher. By now, nearly 24 bystanders had gathered. Some stood on the sidewalk, some leaned against parked cars, and a few hovered on porches. The air buzzed with the awareness that something significant was unfolding, something bigger than just a traffic stop. Moments later, a second patrol car screeched to a halt behind Daniels's cruiser. 2 officers stepped out, hands resting on their belts. They looked younger, less seasoned, but their postures carried the same air of command that came with the uniform. Daniels waved them over quickly, his voice louder than necessary, his tone meant to reassert dominance. Officers, glad you're here. We've got a situation, subject, resisting, possible forged credentials, attempted obstruction. The younger officer stiffened, eyes flicking toward Marcus. Their hands hovered closer to their weapons. The tension thickened like a storm cloud. Marcus raised his voice before Daniels could spin more lies. Officers, before you act, I strongly advise you to ask for clarification. One of them frowned. And you are? Marcus reached into his jacket slowly, deliberately, making sure both his hands were visible. The crowd gasped softly as his fingers brushed against the badge he had retrieved earlier. He pulled it free and held it high for all to see, the sunlight catching on the polished surface. Marcus Johnson, he said, his voice carrying authority, Assistant Director of Internal Affairs. The 2 younger officers froze, exchanging a startled glance. The crowd erupted into murmurs. He's IA. He wasn't lying. The words rippling outward, recorded on dozens of phones. Daniels paled, his bravado faltering, but he still tried to claw back control. Don't listen to him. That badge is fake. He's playing all of you. Marcus cut him off, his voice sharp. Officer Daniels, stop. Every word you speak right now is another nail in your career's coffin. And these officers know it. He turned to the backup, his tone firm but professional. Check with dispatch. My credentials will verify instantly. And while you're at it, request immediate preservation of the dashcam footage from both cruisers. That footage will confirm that Officer Daniels conducted an illegal search, fabricated a warrant, and attempted to falsify a report. The 2 younger officers hesitated, caught between loyalty to their colleague and the gravity of Marcus's words. Their radios crackled, waiting. One finally lifted his mic. Dispatch, this is Unit Bravo 6. Can we get confirmation on a Marcus Johnson, Assistant Director of Internal Affairs? The pause felt eternal. Daniels shifted uneasily, his fingers twitching at his sides. Marcus stood perfectly still, exuding confidence. Copy that, Bravo 6, dispatch finally replied. Confirmed. Johnson is IA, high clearance. Do you need direct contact? The younger officer blinked, his jaw tightening as the weight of the confirmation sank in. He looked at Marcus with new eyes, not as a suspect, but as someone far above his own chain of command. "Yes," Marcus said calmly. "Patch me through to the duty captain." Daniels's mouth dropped open. His grip on the crumpled papers in his hand loosened, and they fluttered to the ground. The false bravado that had fueled him all this time evaporated in seconds. He looked around wildly, realizing every bystander was still recording, their cameras capturing his unraveling in real time. Marcus stepped forward, his badge still visible. "Officer Daniels, you profiled me. You stopped me without cause. You fabricated authority and tried to cover your mistakes with lies. Do you have anything to say for yourself before this goes any further?" Daniels stammered, his voice hollow. I thought. You thought what?" Marcus pressed, his tone calm but devastating. "That I was just another man you could intimidate? That my suit and my car meant I didn't belong here? That you could invent reasons to justify your prejudice?" The officer's lips trembled. He had no answer. The backup officers stood awkwardly, no longer sure how to position themselves. They weren't here to protect Daniels anymore. They were here as witnesses to his downfall. Marcus turned to them. "I want a supervisor on scene. Now." One officer nodded quickly, radioing for a sergeant. Daniels remained rooted to the spot, his confidence stripped bare, the weight of his actions crashing down on him with suffocating force. The crowd grew bolder, voices rising. "He's IA." He caught the cop lying. That's what happens when they pull people over for no reason. Justice right here. Marcus didn't bask in it. His face remained solemn, his posture steady. This wasn't victory, it was accountability, something he had dedicated his entire career to pursuing. He turned back to Daniels one last time, lowering his voice so only the officer could hear. "You thought you had control, but the truth has a way of stripping lies bare. You've disgraced your badge today, and the consequences will follow you." Daniels swallowed hard, sweat dripping down his temple. For the first time since the stop began, he looked small. Not because of Marcus's size, not because of his authority, but because the armor of arrogance had shattered, leaving only fear and regret in its place. Moments later, a sergeant's SUV pulled up, lights flashing. The supervisor stepped out, expression already stern, and the crowd went quiet in anticipation. The tide had turned. Marcus knew this was the turning point. Justice wasn't just coming, it had arrived. The sergeant stepped out of the SUV with the heavy presence of someone who had dealt with hundreds of street-level disputes, but his eyes told a different story. He already sensed this wasn't a routine call. He was a tall man in his 50s with gray streaks through his hair, a jaw set like stone, and the steady walk of someone who didn't rattle easily. "Report," he barked, glancing at Daniels first. Daniels, desperate to regain ground, rushed forward. "Sarge, we've got a situation." This man was resisting, provided false credentials, interfered with an investigation enough. The sergeant's voice cut sharp, silencing him. "I didn't ask for spin. I asked for facts." He turned toward Marcus, and though his tone was measured, his eyes flicked immediately to the badge still gleaming in Marcus's hand. That detail hadn't escaped him. Marcus extended it calmly, his voice professional, clear, and commanding. "Marcus Johnson, Assistant Director, Internal Affairs. I was pulled over without cause." This officer attempted to fabricate justification for the stop, then escalated when I refused to be intimidated. I advised him several times to reconsider his approach. He ignored those warnings. "Your backup confirmed my identity with dispatch." The sergeant accepted the badge with deliberate care, studying it under the streetlight. He turned it over, checked the number, then returned it with a crisp nod. "Mr. Johnson, or rather Assistant Director." "Understood." His eyes hardened as he swung back to Daniels. "And you didn't think to mention any of this when you called for backup?" Daniels shifted on his feet. His voice cracked. "Sarge, I didn't think it was legit." The sergeant cut him off again, his voice like a whip. "That's because you didn't check. Protocol is simple, verify. Instead, you doubled down. Do you realize who you tried to paint as a criminal? Do you realize what kind of mess you've created, not just for yourself, but for this department? Danielle's jaw clenched, shame creeping into his expression. The sergeant motioned toward the backup officers. Turn your body cams toward me. I want this on record. He stepped closer to Marcus. Assistant Director, with your permission, I'd like to document your full statement here on scene before we proceed. Marcus gave a curt nod. That's acceptable. Phones from the crowd continued to hover like glowing fireflies, catching every second. Marcus was acutely aware of the dozens of eyes on him, but he also knew the real reckoning wouldn't happen here in the street. This was the opening act of a process that would stretch into weeks of hearings, reports, and official reviews. Still, in this moment, accountability was beginning. Marcus spoke, evenly, his voice carrying through the silence. At approximately 1900 hours, Officer Daniels initiated a traffic stop without probable cause. When asked for justification, he provided none. Instead, he fabricated authority, claiming to have a warrant he could not produce. He attempted to access my vehicle unlawfully, then escalated his threats when challenged. Upon presenting my credentials, he continued to deny their validity, even after dispatch confirmed them. This is not a mistake. It is a deliberate abuse of authority rooted in bias. The sergeant's expression darkened with every word. He turned to Daniels. Do you have any response? Daniels stammered, sweat gathering at his temples. I thought he was lying. The way he was dressed, the car, none of it added up. I was trying to protect. Marcus cut in sharp. Protect what? The neighborhood from a man drinking coffee in a parked car? Or your own prejudice? Daniels flinched as though struck. The sergeant didn't intervene. He let the words hang heavy in the night air. Finally, the sergeant spoke, his voice gravelly with finality. Officer Daniels, remove your weapon and badge. Now. The crowd gasped. Daniel's eyes widened in disbelief. Sarge, now, the sergeant thundered. You are relieved of duty, effective immediately, pending an internal review. And considering who you try to pull this on, his voice softened with grim emphasis. You're lucky if this doesn't end in criminal charges. Daniel's hands shook as he unclipped his badge and holstered weapon, passing them over. His shoulders sagged, the weight of shame bending him downward. The sergeant handed them to one of the younger officers. Secure these, and make sure every second of tonight's footage is uploaded and locked. No edits, no gaps. The younger officers nodded swiftly, clearly rattled by the gravity of the situation. Marcus studied Daniels for a moment, not with glee or triumph, but with the measured gaze of someone who had seen this pattern far too often. The arrogance, the lies, the unraveling, it was all familiar. You thought you had the power here, Marcus said, his voice quiet but firm, so only Daniels could hear. But the badge doesn't protect corruption. It exposes it. Remember that. Daniels lowered his head, unable to meet his gaze. The sergeant cleared his throat, pulling Marcus's attention back. Assistant Director, would you prefer to handle the next steps personally, or should we transport him pending IA instructions? Marcus considered it. His instincts told him to make an example, but not through humiliation. The real work of accountability happened in the cold, fluorescent-lit rooms of internal hearings, where paperwork carried more weight than shouted accusations. I'll handle it, Marcus said finally. My office will follow up in the morning. For now, secure his reports, his body cam data, and every witness statement you can. These bystanders will need to be logged. He gestured subtly toward the crowd, who were still recording, some even broadcasting live. The sergeant nodded briskly. Understood. Marcus turned back to the people watching. His voice carried with quiet authority, not performative but resolute. What you saw tonight isn't how justice is supposed to work. The badge is meant to protect, not to intimidate. Hold us accountable when we fail that promise. The murmurs softened into thoughtful silence. For once, phones lowered. The weight of his words lingered heavier than the spectacle they had expected. The sergeant began dispersing the crowd, instructing officers to take statements in an orderly fashion. Daniels stood off to the side, stripped of his weapon, his badge gone, his career dangling by a thread. Marcus slipped his badge back into his jacket, his expression unreadable. This wasn't victory. This wasn't satisfaction. It was the beginning of yet another long, exhausting battle against the rot inside the institution he had sworn to protect. But tonight, at least, justice had taken its first step. The next morning, the story was everywhere. Clips from the bystanders' videos had spread across social media overnight, amplified by hashtags and local news outlets hungry for content. The shaky footage showed Marcus holding up his badge, Daniels fumbling through lies, the sergeant demanding he surrender his weapon. Some videos had millions of views already. Headlines screamed across screens. Traffic stop turns into public lesson in accountability. Internal Affairs Director catches officer fabricating evidence. Viral video shows officer relieved of duty after racial profiling incident for the department. It was a public relations wildfire. For Marcus, it was another exhausting example of how quickly one man's arrogance could corrode public trust. He sat at his desk in the Internal Affairs office, a fresh cup of coffee steaming beside his laptop. His inbox was flooded. Statements from the sergeant, preliminary reports from the younger officers, requests for media comment, and messages from community groups thanking him for standing firm. He scrolled through one email from a civil rights advocacy group. "Mr. Johnson, your courage last night sends a clear message. Too often, incidents like this end in tragedy. We applaud your composure and integrity." Marcus exhaled slowly. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man doing the job he had sworn to do, though the world seemed intent on making him a symbol. Across town, Daniels' world was collapsing. Suspended without pay, stripped of badge and weapon, his name dragged across headlines, he sat alone in his small apartment, blinds closed against the daylight. The viral clips replayed in his mind endlessly, his arrogance, his lies, the way his face had drained of color when Marcus revealed his true identity. Calls from family and old friends had slowed to a trickle. Most of them didn't know what to say. Some told him to lawyer up. Others told him he got what he deserved. Deep down, Daniels knew the truth. He had crossed a line too bold to ignore. Meanwhile, in neighborhoods across the city, people were talking. In barbershops, on street corners, over breakfast tables, the story became a rallying point. Parents told their kids, "See, not everyone with power abuses it. Sometimes the system does work." Skeptics countered, "Sure, but only because he was IA. What if he wasn't? What if it was just one of us?" Both truths coexisted, uneasy but undeniable. By mid-afternoon, Marcus was called into a meeting with the chief of police. The conference room was sterile, its long table polished to a reflective sheen, a thin folder placed in front of Marcus's chair. The chief, a woman with decades of service etched into the lines of her face, leaned forward. "Marcus, I won't sugarcoat this. The optics are both a blessing and a curse. You exposed misconduct, good. You embarrassed the department, less good. Daniels' actions are inexcusable, but the public will question how someone like him wore the badge this long." Marcus met her eyes evenly. "They should question that, because the answer says more about our hiring and oversight processes than it does about Daniels as an individual. He didn't become corrupt overnight. This was a pattern we failed to catch or chose to ignore." The chief nodded grimly. "And now it's on us to prove we're addressing it." Silence hung for a moment, heavy with the weight of institutional failings. Finally, she slid the folder toward him. Inside were preliminary notes for an internal review committee. "I want you leading this. Full investigation, not just of Daniels, but of his entire unit. If there are cracks, we need to expose them now." Marcus tapped the folder lightly with his finger, then pulled it closer. "I'll take it, but understand something. When I start pulling threads, they may lead to places the department doesn't want exposed." The chief didn't flinch. "Expose them anyway. Better we clean house ourselves than let the courts or the press do it for us." Marcus inclined his head. It was the closest thing to trust he could ask for. As he left the meeting, his phone buzzed with another notification. A national outlet had picked up the story now. His face, stern and commanding, was splashed across a headline. The man who stood up to corruption in real time. He sighed, slipping the phone back into his pocket. He hadn't wanted fame or even recognition. What he wanted was something far less glamorous: quiet reform, structural accountability, prevention rather than viral spectacle. Later that evening, as dusk painted the sky in soft oranges and purples, Marcus sat alone on his porch with his German shepherd curled at his feet. He sipped coffee and replayed the night in his mind, not as a victory but as a case study. He thought about the way Daniels had smirked when backup arrived, so sure the system would protect him. He thought about the fear in the younger officers' eyes when they realized the truth. And he thought about the crowd, their hunger for justice mingled with cynicism, their cheers tinged with the question, what if he wasn't IA? That question lingered the hardest, because Marcus knew the answer. If he hadn't been internal affairs, Daniels' story might have been the only one recorded in the official report. The lies might have stuck, the intimidation might have succeeded, and another man, any other man, would have walked away with a scar on his record or worse, never walked away at all. Marcus reached down, scratching the dog's head. We've got work to do, he murmured. The shepherd thumped its tail, loyal as ever. The fallout was only beginning. But in the wreckage of one officer's arrogance, Marcus saw the chance to rebuild something stronger, to remind the department and the community that accountability wasn't optional. It was the foundation of trust, and trust, once broken, could only be restored by action, not words. As the first stars blinked awake in the night sky, Marcus resolved that Daniels' downfall would not be the end of the story. It would be the beginning of a reckoning. Weeks had passed since the stop, but the ripple effects hadn't slowed. Daniels' disciplinary hearing was the most publicized in the department's history. Cameras flashed outside the courthouse as he walked in, head bowed, flanked by attorneys. Inside, the Internal Affairs Board sat in a semicircle, folders stacked neatly, eyes sharp and unyielding. Marcus sat at the center of it all, not as a victim, but as the lead investigator. His reports were meticulous: timestamps, radio transcripts, body cam footage, witness statements, even the viral videos from the crowd. Every inconsistency in Daniels' account was highlighted, every false justification picked apart. Daniels tried to defend himself, his lawyer painting him as a man who had misjudged a situation under pressure. But the evidence was overwhelming. The fabricated warrant, the attempted unlawful search, the refusal to acknowledge verified credentials, the racial bias implicit in his assumptions. When the board delivered its verdict, it was swift and final: termination, permanent decertification, and referral to the district attorney for possible criminal charges. The fallout didn't stop with Daniels. The investigation Marcus spearheaded into Daniels' unit uncovered troubling patterns. Minority drivers disproportionately stopped, vague reports filed without supporting evidence, suspiciously high resisting charges. Several officers were reassigned, their cases reopened. Training protocols were reevaluated, and for the first time in years, the department faced real pressure to implement reforms, not just platitudes. In the community, the case became more than a viral headline. It became a touchstone. Activists pointed to it as proof that accountability was possible if people in power were willing to act. Parents used it as a lesson in resilience and integrity. Even skeptics admitted it was harder now for the department to sweep misconduct under the rug. Yet for Marcus, the victory was bittersweet. Late one evening, he sat in his office, the city skyline glowing beyond the glass windows. His desk was cluttered with files, new cases, old complaints, the endless churn of oversight. A photo of his father sat in the corner, a man who had worn the badge with honor decades earlier, before cynicism had poisoned so much of the force. Marcus poured himself a glass of water, leaning back in his chair. He replayed the night in his mind again, not the viral clips, not the headlines, but the quiet moments. Daniels' smirk when he thought he had control, the flicker of fear when the badge came out, the collective gasp of the crowd when the truth was revealed. The whole ordeal wasn't about Marcus Johnson, assistant director of IA. It was about the system. A system that had allowed men like Daniels to thrive unchecked. A system where, too often, the truth only surfaced when cameras were rolling. The chief's voice echoed in his mind from their earlier meeting, "Better we clean house ourselves than let the courts or press do it for us." Marcus had taken those words to heart. He knew this wasn't the end. Daniels' downfall wasn't a cure, it was a symptom exposed. Real change would take years of relentless work, unpopular decisions, and constant vigilance. He stood, grabbing his jacket and badge, and stepped out into the cool night air. The city stretched before him, alive and restless. Somewhere, another officer was making a stop. Somewhere, another citizen was holding their breath, praying the encounter ended peacefully. Marcus knew he couldn't be everywhere, but he could make sure the message of that night carried farther than one street corner, farther than one viral video. As he walked toward his car, his phone buzzed with a text from the sergeant who had relieved Daniels of duty that night. "Just thought you should know. Recruits at the academy are now watching footage of your stop as a training tool. They're being told, this is how quickly arrogance can ruin a career, and this is how integrity stands its ground." Marcus allowed himself the faintest smile. That was a start. He opened the car door, slid inside, and rested his badge on the passenger seat. Its weight was more than metal and leather. It was the burden of responsibility, the reminder of the fine line between protection and abuse. He whispered to himself, almost like a vow, "The badge doesn't make you untouchable. It makes you accountable." The German Shepherd stirred in the back seat, resting its head on the console, as if to agree. Marcus started the engine. The city awaited, and though he knew the battles ahead would be long and unending, he also knew that every step mattered. Every truth exposed, every injustice challenged, every officer reminded that the badge was a promise, not a shield. Daniels' name would fade into the footnotes of disciplinary reports. But the lesson of that night, the legacy of accountability, would remain. And Marcus Johnson, the man who stood unshaken against prejudice and corruption, would carry that fight forward, one case at a time. The road stretched ahead. The work was far from over. But justice had a way of echoing, and Marcus intended to make sure it never went silent again.